Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of our lecture. We are going to talk about moral development and peer interactions. For the first part of moral development, let's just take a look at how our moral development shifts and how we evolve. When we're in early childhood, things are very black and white. We think there's a right and a wrong, and we're very inflexible in our thinking. That changes over time. Just to give you a little example of that, if I were to tell you lying is okay and sometimes necessary, would you agree with that statement? Most likely you would, because you have an evolved moral sense of sometimes things are not as easy as yes or no. It is never okay to steal food. Would you agree with that? And again, because you have a more evolved moral compass, more evolved moral understanding of other people's perspectives and circumstances, you're probably not going to agree with this statement. You should always follow the law. And again, because you have evolved and you're not stuck in that early childhood time period, you're probably thinking about laws in the past that have not been appropriate and been designed to oppress and suppress populations, and understanding that those laws were not appropriate. I'm going to fast forward through some of these so we don't have to go through all of them. But just talking about morality at this point in time for mid childhood, we understand that as early as 6, children really describe freedom of speech and religion as individual rights, meaning that they really feel like you're entitled to them. And this is true even for children who do not belong to countries where they have these rights. Around the age of 7 and 8, they start considering the intention and context of situations before they pass judgment on whether or not lying is okay. They also have a greater understanding regarding the reasons for deception, including bias, trying to be persuasive, concern for others, and protecting others. So they're really taking in more of the idea of what is happening and comprehending what is happening. There is an exception, though. So when there are social conventions with a clear purpose, so they understand why you would engage in a certain way, that is more likely for them to be viewed as a moral transgression, like a really big problem. You shouldn't do it. So again, having that tie to why something is important is imperative when we think about morals for mid-childhood. When we think about morals and how that relates to diversity and equity, we see that there's early associations regarding race. So white people are typically associated with privilege, and people of color are typically associated with inferior status and poverty. White children also receive less direct information regarding race from their parents and adults and peers in their world. The majority of their knowledge comes from the media. And because of that, we see lots of things develop. We see this in group favoritism, which is a typical thing to develop without exposure and education. And that just means that if I identify within a group, I am more likely to favor them and more likely to think highly of them. Out of group bias means that if you are not in my group, that means I am more likely to have a prejudice against you or not prefer you or not like you. We also see out of group favoritism. This happens a lot for minorities, this idea that they actually favor or think highly of somebody outside of their group. And this could be, again, a representation of what they're being taught, either directly or indirectly through things like school and media. All right. We look at what influences our racial and ethnic biases. First, we have this understanding that if we have a fixed view on personality, we are more likely to make negative judgments. And that's this idea that people are who they are. There is no changing them. Their traits belong to them. They don't take into account individual people. It's just kind of this is what applies to that group, and it's not flexible in its thinking. The people who are more likely to be quick to have biases also exhibit higher self-esteem. They tend to put others down to be able to have higher self-evaluation. So by putting others down, they benefit by comparison, right? Also, the idea of sorting into social groups. So children with less interaction and contact with others from diverse backgrounds are going to have higher in-group favoritism. And this is just a matter of exposure. If you're not being exposed to different groups, you're more likely going to favor your in-group. All right, but we can do a lot to reduce prejudice. The first thing we do, obviously, is have contact. So having opportunities for children to work in diverse groups and have exposure and talk and group work. Exposure is its own category in the sense that exposure can work similar to contact, right? The idea of having lots of interactions with diverse populations, but it's also exposure around what we're being taught and how whether or not we're being directly taught how to think of our differences. And that's really key when we think about an educational setting. We're exposed to different viewpoints, we're exposed to different cultures, and we're also taught about those differences and how they exist. We also need to have a belief that there can be change and that people can change and that there can be change overall. And then, of course, education needs to be really intentional and direct. All right, let's jump into peer relations. Peer relations. So peer groups exist. It's just a group of children that has a social structure. Typically, that group of children has their own values and their own norms, and they expect certain things around behavior. The peer culture develops out of an individual expression of that identity, including their dress, vocabulary, and places that they tend to go. Around this time, they also have their kind of rational Exclusion for peer groups is typically a lack of shared interest or a disruption of group norms. So if we're going to exclude somebody from a peer group in mid childhood, it's going to be because they've disrupted the equilibrium somehow, or engaged in a behavior that the group agrees is not appropriate, or they just don't share our interests anymore. They typically do have unjustified exclusion for peer groups at this time as well. This typically comes about when the leaders in the peer groups will remove members using relational aggression. We learned about that before, this idea of like, how can we be aggressive with our relations? How can we make that person not seem wanted or not part of the group? We see around the age of 7 that children understand that you're not allowed or shouldn't exclude children and peers based on the color of their skin. That is something they are aware of at that point in time. When we think about friendships, what are they? They're just mutually agreed upon relationships in which the person likes the individual for the qualities, they enjoy spending time with them. Trust is really the foundation of friendships. When we think about how friendship actually plays out, girls are more exclusive and they seek closeness. So there needs to be a deeper level of relationships. They typically form on similarities such as sex, race, ethnicity, popularity, their academic abilities, the sociability. So you see a lot of commonalities in friend groups. And why do we even bother having friend groups? Well, they contribute to our ability to compromise. We have pro-social behaviors. There's also a place around friendship being able to tolerate criticism better. That's because we think more highly of their opinions and we're more likely to receive them openly. There's also opportunities to resolve conflict and share our thoughts and feelings. When we look past friendships and we look more globally at how children are accepted in schools, we can see that they're broken down into 5 different categories. So this means that we're asking children, do you view this peer favorably or not favorably? And so popular children overwhelmingly get, yes, I view this person as being favorable. Rejected children get overwhelmingly, I view this person as a negative light. I don't view them very positively at all. Controversial children are getting a massive amount of both. They're getting a lot of likes and a lot of dislikes. Neglected children don't really show up at all. They're not mentioned at all. And then average children are your children that get a small number of both dislikes and likes, favorability and unfavorability. So you can see that there are different groups, and maybe even thinking back to your own school experience, you can think about where you would have fallen and also where some of your friends would have fallen or people you liked or disliked, right? When we look more at popular children, we see that there's 2 types of popular children. There's the popular pro-social. These children typically are high achieving academically and they're very social. They have pro-social behaviors. And then we have popular antisocial children. So they have high social abilities, but they also have a defiance for adult authority. Those are the troublemakers or the class clowns, those types of children that you remember having in school. We also can break down rejected children into 2 categories. There's rejected aggressive. These students have high levels of impulse control, not being able to, very impulsive. They have high levels of conflict. They utilize physical and relational aggression. So they're really hard to manage and to form a positive relationship with because they have all of these behaviors that make it very difficult to engage in a productive relationship. Just straight rejected, they tend to be more withdrawn. They have high levels of social anxiety that causes the withdrawal and negative expectations and interactions with peers. Because of this, it's kind of circular because they're not getting exposure to having good experiences. They become more withdrawn. There's more anxiety. Those are those 2 groups. Let's talk a look about controversial and neglected children. So controversial children, remember, being those children that get really high ratings, both for being liked and disliked. And we see as a mix of pro-social and negative behaviors. So they're not often excluded, but because they're not often excluded and they have these really high levels of pro-social behaviors, so understanding of social context, they're also more likely to be a bully. Neglected children have minimal peer interaction, but they have high rates of adjustment, meaning that they can interact if they need to, and they can form positive relationships, but they're not children that have lots of friend groups. They're more likely to have 1 or 2 really close friends and maybe keep to themselves, but it's not because they're not capable of engaging. All right, moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about bullying here. We know that, there's peer victimization, that's individual children become repeated targets of bullies. This could be verbal or physical or other forms of abuse. We know that about 5 to 12% of students are bullies. And we also know that about 20 to 30% of onlookers during behavior or bullying are actually encouraging the bullying to take place. So they don't actually even intercept or try and stop the bullying, they encourage it. That's 20 to 30%. So you can see how onlookers play a pretty critical role in bullying. I wanted to share with you a little bit more about bullying and how it breaks down in age groups. What we're looking at on the left side is the bullying that actually takes place in schools. And we're looking on the right side is all of the online or cyberbullying that we see. And we can see that there's probably the worst time for bullying is that middle school time period. And we see an increase overall, with the exception of elementary school, in online bullying as children get older. It moves out of schools to online. Elementary school is the only area that it goes down as far as going from in school to online. That's probably just access and being able to understand those relationship contexts, right? And understanding that relational aggression is not as prevalent yet until mid childhood. Typically, bullies can be disliked, but they also might be admired. Victims tend to have controlling parents, parents that are overprotective, and because of this, they have a low self esteem and dependency, and they also have more of a fearful demeanor. And we know that the results of bullying all lead to depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. So, a lot of really negative outcomes. All right, with that, we're going to stop here. I will see you back for gender typing.